Okay, so picture this. It's the middle of the 20th century, and the world is literally splitting in two. And for an entire continent caught right in the middle, one leader comes along and proposes this radical third way. A vision not just for his own country, but for a totally united Latin America. Today, we're going to unpack Juan Perón's ambitious and, yeah, pretty controversial continental dream. The year 2000 will find us united or dominated. Just think about that line for a second. This single, stark choice that Perón laid out way back in 1953, it just perfectly captures the high-stakes world he was trying to navigate and the future he was desperately trying to build. So to really get what he was aiming for, we have to rewind a bit, right to the end of the Second World War. A new global order was being hammered out, and for Latin America, this presented a massive, massive challenge. And things were moving fast. I mean, really fast. In February of 45, you have the Yalta Conference, which basically slices the globe into two spheres of influence, one for the US, one for the Soviets. Then, just 1 month later, and much closer to home, the Chapultepec Conference goes down, cementing an American-led economic order that Perón saw as a direct threat to his continent's future. And yeah, the takeaway from Chapultepec was pretty clear. Latin American nations were essentially being forced to pick a side. You could align with US-led capitalism, or you could align with Soviet communism. Any kind of independent economic path, well, that was basically being taken off the table. So what do you do? Faced with what he saw as two different flavors of imperialism, Perón came up with this unique ideological answer. First, he rolled it out for Argentina, but his sights were set much bigger. He called it the third position. Now, the third position wasn't just a catchy political slogan. It was a whole doctrine. It was trying to carve out a path that was neither capitalist nor communist, but something else entirely. Something that aimed to balance the rights of an individual with the needs of the whole community. And this is really the key to understanding it. The third position wasn't pitched as some simple compromise, halfway point. No, it was presented as a better way, a synthesis. It rejected what Perón saw as the soulless individualism of capitalism and the crushing state control of communism. Instead, it proposed a new balance, one centered on human dignity and social justice. What's wild is just how ahead of its time this idea really was. This was all being formulated in the late 1940s. That's years before the famous Bandung Conference in 1955, which most people see as the birth of the whole non-aligned movement. So this was a truly pioneering call from the global south for a third world, before that was even really a concept. But here's the thing. For Perón, the third position was never ever just about Argentina. He saw it as a blueprint, a model that he believed could liberate and empower the entire continent. And that's where his continental dream really kicks into high gear. United, we will be unconquerable, separated, indefensible. This right here was the core of his logic. So simple, right? Perón argued that as long as they were individual, separate nations, Latin American countries would always be vulnerable, always be easy to exploit. But united? Well, united, they could form a massive geopolitical bloc, one powerful enough to actually control its own destiny. And he wasn't just dreaming. He had a real step-by-step game plan. The idea was to start with a strong southern core, an economic union between Argentina and Chile. Then bring in the regional giant Brazil to create this powerful ABC pact. And from that rock-solid foundation, the vision was to expand into a full-blown South American confederation. And the way he pitched this was brilliant. He didn't present it as some radical new thing. Instead, he framed it as finishing the job, as fulfilling the unfinished dream of the continent's great liberators, like San Martin and O'Higgins. He was essentially calling for a second independence, only this time from economic empires. But as you can probably guess, a plan this huge, this ambitious, it was always going to run into some serious opposition. And Perón was definitely not naive about where that opposition was going to come from. And wow, check this out. This is from an actual internal U.S. State Department memo, and it is incredibly revealing. It shows that right from the get-go, American foreign policy saw a united South American bloc not as a potential partner, but as a direct threat that needed to be actively stopped. So from Perón's perspective, he was fighting a war on multiple fronts. You had the external pressure from the United States, for sure, but internally, he also pointed to collaborators. He called them vendepatrias, which means those who sell out their country, and outright sabotage from powerful institutions like Brazil's foreign ministry. And, most critically, he zeroed in on the strategic use of debt. $3 billion. That's the amount of foreign debt Argentina racked up in just 6 years after Perón was kicked out of power. Now, why is that number so shocking? Because during his government, Perón had paid off all of Argentina's foreign debt. The contrast is just staggering. I would cut off my hand before signing for a loan. For Perón, this wasn't just talk. He genuinely believed that foreign loans weren't a form of aid. They were a trap. He saw them as the #1 tool used by powerful nations to drain a country's wealth and control its policies. He even had a name for it: decapitalization. And he didn't just say it was a trap. He actually broke down the math on it. He argued that between things like an overvalued dollar, being forced to buy overpriced goods without competitive bidding, and all the hidden fees, a nation was lucky if it even saw half the actual value of the loan it signed for. But its people were still on the hook to pay back 100% of it, plus interest. All of this brings us full circle, right back to that fundamental choice that Perón laid out in 1953. And it forces us to really think about whether his continental vision still has something to tell us today. So when you boil it all down, what's the ultimate takeaway from this whole thing? Well, it's an idea that's much bigger than just one man or one moment in history. It really speaks to this powerful, ongoing argument for national sovereignty. Perón's core argument was that history was moving towards these huge, integrated continental blocks. He believed the great fights of the future wouldn't be about ideology, but about resources: food, water, raw materials. And in that kind of world, Latin America faced a simple choice: form your own bloc to protect your own wealth and people, or get divided up and controlled by others. The age-old strategy of divide and conquer could only be beaten by a strategy of unite to liberate. And so we end right where we started. Whether you think Perón's project was a viable dream or just an impossible fantasy, the question he asked, well, it still echoes, doesn't it? It's still right at the heart of debates all over the world about global power, about sovereignty, and about the future of an entire continent.